design is incomplete if a subject experiences each condition only one time. So going back to the dog food study, if I had a dog and that dog eats chunks and lumps once, and Purina once, and Kroger kibble once, then that would be an incomplete design. Okay? So complete means each subject experiences each condition more than once. Incomplete design means each subject experiences each condition once and only once. But in both cases, every subject experiences every condition. Now, we also classify within subjects' designs in terms of the number of random orders that we use. So we talked about last time, in terms of between subjects' designs, we talked about how we can determine how many possible random orders there are of the conditions in our study, right? We talked about block randomization, and I told you that we can use the strategy where if x is the number of conditions in the study, then x times x minus 1, times x minus 2, times x minus 3, and so forth until you get to 1, will give you the possible number of random orders of the conditions. And in a between subjects design, we use those random orders to then assign subjects to the different conditions in the study. So if I'm using the block BAC, that would translate in our dog food study to Purina, Chunks, Kroger, and then the first dog that comes in would go into the Purina condition, the dog that comes in next would go into the Chunks and Lumps condition, the dog that comes in last would go into the Kroger condition. That's if we were doing it in a between subjects way. But in a within subjects design, all the dogs, or all the subjects, are experiencing all the conditions. So what are we using these random orders for? We're using them for ordering the conditions for the different subjects. So as an example, if I have the orders for my conditions ABC, BAC, CAB, what else do I have? ACB, BCA, and CBA, right? That's all of them? Mm-hmm. All the possible orders? Mm-hmm. So what am I going to use these blocks for now? Now I'm going to use them to present the foods to my dogs in different orders to mix up what they eat before what else, or what they eat after what else. Why would I want to do that? Why would it matter what the dogs eat first and what they eat second and what they eat third?
Might be more hungry the first time around.
Yeah, the first time they walk in the door, they might be like, oh, hey, it's new food. You ever give your dog a new food? They tend to get really excited about new food. So, yay, new food. So they eat a ton. And then you give them another food, and they're like, just ate 5 pounds of the food, not hungry, right? So if you feed them, if you're doing all the presentations in a single day, that would be a big concern, right? Even if you split it up over a course of days. Imagine that I have the dogs come in and I just give them a different food each day, and I make them come in day after day after day after day. Well, I could imagine that on the first day, the dog and the dog's person come into the lab, and the dog's a little bit freaked out, right? This is not where the dog normally goes. This is not where the dog normally eats. This is not the dog's normal dish. This is not the, normal situation. And so the dog might be nervous. And so the dog might choose on the first day not to eat very much at all. And then as the dog gets used to coming into the lab and eating the food, the dog starts to eat more. So if that's the case, I need to switch up the order that the animals in my study get exposed to the different foods so that if there is the first day freak out, I don't want to eat thing, I get that for all the different foods, right? Not just one. And if by the end of the study they're eating a lot, I get that for all the foods and not just one. So I need to mix up the order that I present the foods. And we're going to do that using the possible random orders. The question is, am I going to use the random orders once, twice, or more than that? So we're going to talk about different ways I can use these orders. Now, what I've been talking about here are what we call sequence effects. Sequence effects are the #1 threat to the internal validity of a within subjects design. The hardest thing about making sure that the outcome of your study is about your treatment and not about something else is controlling the order in a within subjects design. Now sometimes it's not possible to control the order. For example, if I'm doing a study where I'm gathering data about children and their learning to read, and I gather data from the children when they're 4, and when they're 4 1/2, and when they're 5, and when they're 5 1/2, and when they're 6, and when they're 6 1/2, and when they're 7. I can't control that order, right? I can't mix that up. Time is fixed. So I have to gather the 4-year-old data before the 4 1/2-year-old data, and the 4 1/2-year-old data before the 5-year-old data. I have to. That's just the way it works. But if it's possible for me to mix up the order, I want to do that for the reasons that I was describing before. I don't know how the different orders of conditions might influence each other. And my biggest concern is that my subjects will somehow be impacted by experiencing one of the conditions in such a way that it changes their response to another condition. I mean, just imagine. Say that I was working with individuals who had phobias. Okay? How about arachnophobia? You know what arachnophobia is? Fear of spiders. Anybody here have arachnophobia? Because I don't want to traumatize you with this example. I can change it if I need to. I have a friend who is so freaked out by spiders that if you put a picture of a spider on his Facebook page, he will unfriend you. He is terrified, totally terrified of spiders. He can't even look at a picture of a spider without having a panic attack. Fastest way to get off Scott's friend list. Post a picture of a tarantula. So if, say that you have somebody who's afraid of spiders, and you have these different treatments you want to explore to see which is the most effective. Okay? If I say, all right, I'm going to try using a shaping procedure. You know what a shaping procedure is? That's where you gradually introduce the person to the behavior you want them to perform, helping them build up the behavior. So I want them to not panic when they see a spider. So say, first thing I do is show them a picture of a spider. Now someone who has true arachnophobia will start to get increased heart rate and have a fear response at just a picture. Okay? So then once I get them to the point where they can look at a picture of a spider without having that response, then I might actually put a rubber spider on the desk in front of them. Okay, not even a real spider. Not a threat, it's a rubber spider. Okay? And they'll start to have a panic response. So then I work with them, talk them through it till they stop having that panic response to the rubber spider. Then I might have them actually put the rubber spider on their hand, right? And that's going to give them a response. Even though they know it's a rubber spider, they're still going to have a panic response because they're touching something that's spider-like. Okay? And so they put that on their hand. And slowly, and then I might say, okay, you've got to where you can do it with the rubber spider. Now I'm going to take a real spider, but it's dead.
Ugh.
And put it on the desk.
Gross.
Okay. Didn't say this was pretty, this is science. Okay, so I'm going to put the rubber spider, or the real spider, but it's dead on the desk. I'm going to say, okay, now I want you to touch the real spider, even though it's dead.
No.
Okay. And you're like, no, I couldn't even do that. I'm not going to touch the dead spider. Well, okay, it's an example. We're going to keep doing it. All right. So then I'm going to bring in a real live tarantula in a jar. And of course they're going to freak out, because now this is a real spider and it's moving. And then when they get to the point where they can calm down, then I'm going to have them put the tarantula on their hand.
Oh,
right?
No.
Okay. So we've reached your limits, I understand, okay. But here's the idea. So that's a shaping procedure. What I'm doing is gradually moving the patient towards the point where they no longer have that instant fear response to a spider. Okay. That life shut down fear response to a spider. Now, if I do that, and I get the person to where they now can hold a tarantula, there's no way I can now turn around and do any other kind of treatment for that person, because this person is now no longer has the same phobia response that they had at the beginning of the study. So I can't introduce them to a new treatment now. It doesn't work, right? Because they're not afraid anymore. I've already taught them how not to be afraid. So there are some cases where it's very difficult to do a within subjects design. In that case, you'd have to take people who are all comparably afraid of spiders and try different kinds of treatments to see which one resulted in the most effective reduction in the phobia. Because once you've treated them, if it works, then you can't treat them again. And if it doesn't work, Okay, so let's say you try the shaping procedure and it doesn't work. The person is still horribly terrified of spiders. And then you say, well, let's try a different treatment. Let's try an exposure treatment. You know what exposure therapy is? If you're afraid of spiders, scare the crap out of you. This is where we basically put you in a room with a whole bunch of spiders.
Flooding?
Yeah, flooding technique, right. So you can do a flooding technique. And basically you just overwhelm your system and realize you're not going to die in a room full of spiders. So you'll be okay. Well, so let's say the flooding technique works. At that point, we don't know if it's the flooding technique that worked or if it was the combination of the shaping plus the flooding technique that worked. We can't tell because the person has changed and their response to spiders has changed because of what you've been doing to them in the study. So in a within subjects design, the order in which you present things is important. And you need to make sure that the order isn't causing the effect. It's the actual treatment. So there are a couple ways that can happen. One is in a localized way, meaning that I experience condition A, and my experience in condition A influences my experience in condition B. Okay? So I come in the first day. I'm really excited. I'm one of those dogs that gets really excited when I'm in a new place, and I'm always hungry, and I'll eat anything new. If it hits the floor, it's mine. Okay? I have a dog like that. His name is Thor. Okay? Anything hits the floor, Thor is on it in a heartbeat. I don't have to sweep or anything. He just vacuums up everything on the floor. Okay? Thor would walk in the room in that situation, and whatever was in the bowl, he would inhale it. Okay? And he would keep eating. As long as you would put food in the bowl, he would eat it. Now, if he does that, because he normally gets like 2 to 2.5 cups of food a day. He's a big boy, but he doesn't like to move around a lot, so he's on a fairly restricted diet. But he would sit there and eat 5 or 6 cups of food if you let him. Okay? What's going to happen to a dog that normally eats 2 cups of food a day that sits down and eats 5 or 6 cups of food? The next day he's going to come in, he's going to be like, oh my God, it made me so sick. Doesn't matter what I put in front of him, he's going to be like, I can't even eat, I'm still full from yesterday. It's like that day after Thanksgiving effect, right? Where you eat so much you can't move, and the next day everyone's like, let's have turkey sandwiches! And you're like, get away from me. I never want to see that stuff again, right? I'm so sick of turkey right now. So,
Somebody's at the door trying to get in there.
okay, so, I think someone left something in here. Okay, so the issue is that the way that dog is responding to the food on day 2 is an immediate artifact of what they did on day 1. Does that make sense? And that's a carryover effect. In other words, there's a lingering impact of experiencing that first day food that's affecting how the dog responds to the second day food. Now, we call that a carryover effect because it's localized. Give the dog another day. If the dog doesn't eat for a whole day because it was so full that second day, we all know that 2 days after Thanksgiving, you're ready for a turkey sandwich, right? You're like, actually, the turkey sandwich sounds really good. I think I'm going to put some cranberry sauce and mashed potatoes on there. I'm going to like make that post-Thanksgiving sandwich of doom with gravy and everything, like this nasty thing. You're like, even though you ate so much of it 2 days before you couldn't move, you couldn't think about it, but then on the third day, you're good. Okay? Thor would be the same way. Thor, on the second day, would be like, I'm not touching any of that Purina. Ugh, I can't eat it. I'm so full. But on the third day, walk in, Kroger kibble, gone, half the bag. Okay? So he'd be back to his normal self. So that's a carryover effect, where something is very localized and the effect disappears after a very short period of time. The influence of one condition on another disappears after a very short period of time. That's one kind of sequence effect, or order effect, as it's referred to in your book. Another kind of effect is the progressive effect. Okay? These are effects that grow over the course of the presentation of stimuli, or presentation of different conditions. And we think of them as more global. They tend to affect a broad stretch of conditions, not just 1 or 2 right next to each other. Your book talks about a couple different kinds of these progressive effects. One kind is a learning effect. The other kind is a fatigue effect. Now, learning effect has to do with learning the task that you need to do for a particular test. Now, if you're engaging in an experiment that involves you doing multiple conditions, like we talked before about a problem-solving one, right? Where people could solve a problem on their own, solve it with 2 other people, or solve it with 4 other people. Well, in a study like this, it's possible that your experience solving the problem the first time, whether you do it on your own or with other people, could influence how you approach the problem that you get in the next condition. Right? And you might, in the beginning, whatever condition you get first, might be the hardest because you're just trying to get used to what it is you need to do and thinking about different ways you could solve the problem. But the more you do it, the better you get. So it could be that your performance in the first condition is always less creative than your performance in the last condition because you get more creative as you go from experience. You've learned how to solve the problem more creatively just by having to do it over and over and over. We see this in classes too. You know, the first test in a class is always the hardest, right? Why?
You're getting used to the testing style.
That's right. You don't know how the person tests. You don't know what kind of questions they ask. You don't know the balance between how much is coming out of the book, how much is coming out of lecture, how much is going to be memorization, how much is going to be application, right? You don't know what the right balance is, and you learn over time. So typically people do worst on the first test when it comes to, they don't know how to match their studying to how the person tests and things like that. So you get a bad match. If you get a bad match, your first test is typically not as good, but you learn over time and you get better. So testing in a class is a form of within subjects design, right? I'm gathering multiple points of data from the same people over and over. So the same thing can happen in a study where over the course of the study, subjects get better and better at doing whatever it is you ask them to do, so their performance is better at whatever condition showed up at the end and worse on whatever condition showed up at the beginning. That would be a learning effect, sometimes referred to as a practice effect, because they get better at doing whatever it is you ask them to do. To address this, sometimes if we're doing a within subjects design, what we'll do is we'll have subjects actually do some practice trials. So we'll actually give them a subset of stimuli that aren't actually part of the study and get them to do those stimuli until they reach some level of performance. And then once they've kind of leveled out in their behavior, then we start gathering real data. Yeah.
So is a practice effect something to control for, or is it something that we observe that we know happen? Like, is it necessarily like...
Is it a problem?
Right.
It depends. So if you didn't mix up the order of your conditions, it would be a problem. So for example, if I had all the dogs come in on the first day and eat chunks and lumps, and then on the second day I had everybody eat Purina, and then on the third day everybody eat Kroger, it would be a problem because I would have introduced a confound into my study because order would now be confounded with the food type. So it can be a problem. But there are strategies we can use to address it. So I can say, like I said, I could do a practice. So what I might do is have the dogs come in for a few days before I actually start gathering data and let them come in and eat their own food that they're used to in that room, in the dishes I'm going to use, with their owner there, at the time of day I'm going to have, so I can get them acclimated to the environment so it no longer influences their behavior. So I can basically get rid of the practice effect by acclimating them to what it is I want them to do first. And then I start introducing the new foods, and that's the only thing that's different, as opposed to all the other things that could be getting mixed up with that new food in the beginning. Another thing that I can do is take those practice effects and distribute them across the conditions. So say I can't do that. Say I only have access to the lab for certain days, or my subjects are only able to come in for the course of 1 week. I've got 5 days to work with or something, and that's it. Okay, well, so what I do then is I say, all right, when the dogs come in, when this dog comes in, first day this dog's getting chunks and lumps. The other dog that comes in on that first day, that dog's getting Purina. The next dog that comes in, that dog's getting Kroger kibble. So what I'm doing is distributing the practice effects across all the conditions. So I give some dogs each food on the first day, and the next day I give some dogs each food, and on the third day I give some dogs each food, and on the fourth day I give some dogs each food. And so what happens is, if there are practice effects, if it does turn out that dogs eat less at the beginning of the study and more towards the end of the study, I've got data from every food at every point in time in the order. And now I'm not so worried about the fact that there was practice at the beginning, because the practice affects all the conditions equally. So there's different ways to deal with that as a strategy. There's also issues of fatigue. Some studies, where you're gathering lots of data from a single subject, can involve having to do tasks that are difficult or restrictive, challenging for some reason. I've done studies where I put people in MRI, and had them look at sentences on the computer screen and respond to those sentences and decide whether or not the sentences make sense or don't make sense, and tell me when, as they're looking at the sentence, it stops making sense. And they have to lay in that machine for an hour or so. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in an fMRI, but it's a big tube, big magnet, and it's really, really loud because there's a magnet spinning around you at high speed in this big metal container. You can't have any metal on you anywhere because it's such a strong magnet it can actually pull metal through your skin. So it can actually pull earrings out of your ears if they're magnetic material. Some people won't even get in an MRI if they have magnetic dyes in their tattoos because they're worried about the ink getting pulled up out of their skin. Not awesome. Okay. I have several tattoos. I would like them not to be pulled out of my skin because I put them in there on purpose. But it's a loud machine, and you have to lay very, very still while you're in the machine. Now imagine you're in this big, loud, clunky machine. It's very claustrophobic because it's very close to you. You're in this tiny, tiny tube. It's really loud. You're staring at a screen, looking at sentences, trying really hard not to move, and your nose itches or something, right? I mean, it's really hard, right? And people get worn out doing fMRI studies. It's hard to do that study and stay super, super still and stay super, super focused for a long time. But it takes a lot to get somebody in the tube and get them prepared to be in the tube. So once you get them in there, you want to get as much data as you possibly can. So we bribe them with lots of money. Well, not a lot, but we'll pay them $50 or $75 or $100 to lay in the tube for an hour. Okay. And so they can get tired. And what happens then is that people in the tube at the beginning are very focused, right? They're all in there. They're like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And then after a while, their muscles start to get sore, and it's hard to hold still, and so they start to relax, and they start to shift a little bit. And even tiny millimeters in shifting, in some cases, can result in their head moving. And then where you're measuring in their brain, you can't see, it goes, and you're like, oh, great, now I can't see where, now I'm looking at a totally different part of your brain than I was looking at a minute ago. Crap. It's like we really need your head to stay in one place because we're gathering data about blood flow in your brain while you perform certain cognitive tasks. So if you move your head just a few millimeters, it has the potential to basically make the picture of your brain all blurry, and I can't tell which part of your brain you were using. So what happens in those kind of studies? People's performance is really high at the beginning because they're super amped up because they're in this really loud tube. And it's really exciting, and we're doing all this stuff, and we've done all this prep to get them in there. And then they're like, oh my God, I'm so freaking sick of doing this dumb experiment. I don't care if they're paying me $50. Oh God, I want to get out of this stupid tube. I gotta pee. Right? And so their performance can go down. Well, so what do? Same thing, right? You can't make, you could just make the session shorter, but that might be prohibitive because it's more expensive to get them to come in and do all the prep that you have to do to get them in the tube, to have them be safe in the tube, and they might not be willing to come in multiple times, so you might need to do it all at once. So what can you do? Well, the same thing that you do with practice effects. If you mix up the order that they see the stimuli, then you'll get really good data at the beginning of the list for all the stimuli from at least somebody, or at least from a few somebodies if you run a few subjects. And then as people get fatigued, the data might be less accurate, but you're getting that slightly less accurate data distributed across the different conditions because you've got somebody looking at every condition later on and somebody looking at every condition early on. So it mixes it up. So basically what you're trying to do is distribute those differences that emerge from people's fatigue or from their learning across the different conditions. So in a way, it's like balancing across conditions that we did before. You're just trying to balance the bad effects across conditions too. The same idea. Now when we do this technique is called counterbalancing, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the good and the bad to be distributed as evenly as we can across the different conditions. And of course, we want as much good as we can get, but we recognize that we can't control everything, and that bad things can happen in the form of sequence effects. And so we're going to try and distribute those sequence effects as evenly as we can across the conditions so they have minimum impact. Because they impact each condition equally, as equally as we can make them. And when we counterbalance, we can do that in one of two ways. We can either do a full counterbalance, which means we present the subjects in our study with every possible random order of the stimuli. So we get every possible combination, every condition before every other condition, every condition after every other condition. We use every possible random order there is. Or we can do a partial counterbalance, which means we pick some subset of the random orders that we could use. And it's not just an arbitrary subset, it's a systematic choice that we'll make to try and maximize the effectiveness of counterbalancing while presenting subjects with as few stimuli as possible, because we're trying to avoid fatigue. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to switch over now. Did everybody grab a handout on their way in? Okay. Did you get a handout last time? First we're going to do the handout from last time. I just want to make sure that we're going to jump into that other handout as soon as we get done here. Did everybody grab a handout last time, the repeated measures design handout? This one, here. This should look a lot like the independent measures design I had. You guys have this one from last time? They're available on the website, but I don't have handout more than once. But you'll be able to see what I'm talking about up here, and then you can download and print out from the website. Okay. All right, so let's talk about complete designs. Okay? Complete designs, as I said, are designs where we use more than one presentation of the stimuli for each subject, or for each more than one presentation of the conditions for each subject. That means that, for example, each dog in my study is going to eat chunks and lumps more than once, Purina more than once, and Kroger more than once. And it just has to be more than once. 2 times is enough. But when you use a complete design, you have the potential to gather order data, or to control for order effects within subjects. In other words, you can get data from a single subject that has chunks before Purina and Purina before chunks. You can do that for everybody. You can get Purina before Kroger and Kroger before Purina. You can get Kroger before chunks and chunks before Kroger. Right? So you can get information from every subject about every combination if you do a complete design, because you've got a chance to present every type of condition more than once. Now there are a couple ways we can do this. We can do this in an extended way, or we can do it in a more restricted way. If we do it in an extended way, what we're going to do is what we just call block randomization, just like before. We're going to figure out orders of our foods that we could present, and then we're going to present blocks of foods to the dogs over the course of days, changing up the blocks for the dogs, and gathering as much data as we can until the dogs have to stop. So for example, here's just a snapshot of what that might look like. So we start off on day 1, and I decide that the block I'm going to give Rover over the first series of days is day 1, Rover's going to get chunks. Day 2, Rover's going to get Purina. Day 3, Rover's going to get Kroger. So I've assigned a block to that particular dog. That's the block that that dog's going to get over the first 3 days. Fido is going to get a different block. Pumpkin is going to get another block. And you'll notice that the way I've selected these blocks results in not only blocks for each dog, but blocks across the dogs. So chunks, Purina, Kroger, so every food is presented on the first day. Every food is presented on the second day. Every food is presented on the third day. So I'm mixing it up as much as I can. Now, if I wanted to, I could stop there, but that wouldn't be a complete design. Because each dog needs to experience each food more than once for it to be a complete design. Now, in a world where I have infinite resources and people who are willing to bring their dogs in day after day after day after day after day, I could literally run every single dog on every single sequence. That would be beautiful. I would love that. Even if I can't do that, even if I'm restricted, maybe I only have 9 days. I have 2 weeks to run subjects. I need 1 day as a backup in case there's bad weather or something like that. So I'm only able to do 9 days of data collection. What I want to do is present each dog with different orders and gather as much data as I can. Mix up the orders as much as possible. The important thing is I want to gather the same amount of data for each type of food. Same amount of data for each type of food. And at every given point in time, I want to have roughly the same amount of information about each type of food. And so every day, I'm switching it up. There's no day, okay, except for this last day. I don't know why I did that. This should be Kroger, sorry. You can mark that off and put Kroger here. There's no day where I'm repeating foods. So I'm getting the same number of data points for every food on any given day. If I had to stop at day 5, I would have the same amount of data for every food, okay, in terms of eating data. So I'm just rotating and rotating and rotating using those blocks. Because I have 3 conditions, I'm going to want to work in multiples of 3. I'm going to present for 3 days or 6 days or 9 days or 12 days or 18 days or 21 days. I want to keep working so that I have complete blocks of data all the time. Now, that's if I can go on forever and ever. But if I can't, what if I'm restricted in how much I can do, but I still want to do a complete design? Well, one alternative, and a popular alternative, is to do something called ABBA counterbalancing. And that's the next example. ABBA counterbalancing is where I select a random order for each dog to start off with, and then the second random order that they experience is just the first order in reverse. So for Rover, I choose Chunks, Purina, Kroger. That's his first series. That's his first block. For Fido, Fido's first block is Purina, Kroger, Chunks. Pumpkin's first block is Kroger, Chunks, Purina. Once I've made that selection about what order they're going to experience the conditions in the first time, that dictates what the second order will be. All I do is put it in reverse. So if Rover got Chunks, Purina, Kroger, that means his second presentation of the conditions will be Kroger, Purina, Chunks. Fido gets Purina, Kroger, Chunks, that means his second presentation will be Chunks, Kroger, Purina, automatically. Okay? So it's a way to get the different orders that I need with as few presentations as possible and still get a complete design. So every dog has seen every food twice, which means I've got my complete design, that's what I wanted. But I've now made a selective choice about the orders and now limited the number of times they have to come into the lab. Now I can get everybody done in 6 days. Hooray! That's good. And you'll notice that when I do it this way, I've actually used all 6 of the possible random orders too. Handy. Yeah.
My question is, so on day 3 and day 4, they have the same food as the day previously. Are we not concerned that that's going to have an effect on how much they want because everyone has the same conditions, so it'll be balanced? Like, is that?
It could be. So the reason that we do it this way, this is particularly useful if we're worried about those kind of progressive effects that change over time, where I'm expecting the dogs to have either their worst performance or their best performance on the first day, and then have it shift gradually over time to the opposite. When you do it this way, what happens is it averages out. So lowest performance here, highest performance here, average those together, and then I get a single chunks value that's maybe more representative of what they would do. Here I have a little bit better Purina performance and almost best Purina performance, average those together, and it's more representative of what they would do. So the idea, yes, it's strange that they have these 2 in the middle, but the idea is also that these would roughly be, those would probably be pretty similar, and I would average them out. So we'd actually expect the standard deviations to be bigger out here and gradually get smaller. Okay. But because we're doing it across the different dogs, we would, not only can we look at the individual dogs, but then I can take this Kroger data and mix it with this Kroger data and mix it with this Kroger data, and now I've got data, multiple points of data for first position and last position, second and fourth position, and third and fourth position, right? It's like whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay.
Trying to do it. Does that make sense? So we're not just going to look at individual dogs, because this is a sample. We're going to average their data all together. What this is allowing me to do is get data from every food in every position, but getting multiple data points from each animal.
Okay.
trying to reduce the potential impact of any individual differences among the subjects in my study. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, so we can just do block randomization where we just do block after block after block after block after block. That's fine. Or we can limit it, do ABBA counterbalancing. Those are our strategies for doing complete designs. But what if, for some reason, we choose not to do a complete design? Maybe we're limited in terms of time or resources, or maybe we have a lot of animals but not a lot of time. Then what we might choose to do instead is an incomplete design. In an incomplete design, your subjects experience each condition only one time. Right? We're still going to be using our blocks, but now each block maps onto a single subject. Okay, so no subject is seeing multiple blocks of anything. Each subject is experiencing only one block order. So if we look down here at my subjects, I have two options. I can either do a full counterbalance, which means I have 6 orders. That means I need multiples of 6 subjects. Okay? So the minimum I can have, if I have 6 possible random orders of my conditions, the minimum number of subjects I can have is 6 subjects. Because for this, I need to have 1 subject for each order for this to be a full counterbalance. I have to have every possible order represented for this to be a full counterbalance. Now you'll notice full counterbalancing is easy with a complete design, right? Even in an ABBA counterbalancing situation, I'm fully counterbalancing. So we don't even worry about full counterbalancing when we're talking about complete designs. It's super easy to do. So we don't even worry about it. We only talk about whether counterbalancing is full or partial in the case of incomplete designs. Because this is where it actually matters whether you did it or not. So if I do full counterbalancing, if I have an incomplete design with full counterbalancing, that means that I have at least one subject that experienced each of the possible random orders. Okay, so I've got one dog that got chunks Purina Kroger, another dog that got Purina Kroger chunks, another dog that got Kroger chunks Purina, and so forth. There are 6 possible orders. I have 6 dogs. And each one of them got a different order. Optimally, I would then want multiples of 6, so I could take 6 dogs, 12 dogs, 18 dogs, 24 dogs, so that I would always have the same amount of data for each of the orders. But in this case, I'm not getting data about Purina chunks Kroger and Kroger chunks Purina from the same dog. I'm getting it from 2 different dogs, so now we're throwing in some issues of potential individual differences that could influence performance. Right? But I'm still getting data for every possible order. So my task then, it's a little bit more challenging. I have to make sure that these dogs are more similar, right, so that using the different orders won't cause a problem. So here's full counterbalancing. Every possible order of the 3 conditions is represented. This, here I can get more, I need more subjects, but I can finish the study in less time because I only need 3 days, right? All right, now, what if I'm even more restricted? Maybe I'm doing a pilot study. Maybe I just have much more limited resources. Maybe I'm an undergrad and I'm just doing a quick study as an experiment for a class, and I don't have days and days and lots of money for subjects. I need as few subjects as possible, as few repetitions as possible. What do I do? Well, then what you probably want to go for is an incomplete design with partial counterbalancing. Okay? This is where you use a subset of the possible random orders, and not all of them, just particular ones. The question is, how do you decide which ones you should use? And the answer is, you use the ones that are going to give you as much counterbalancing as possible for minimum effort. And I'm going to show you how to figure that out. So if we look down here, here's an example of an incomplete design with partial counterbalancing. And you can see that each dog has a unique order of food. Each day, each food is represented for at least one subject. Another way to describe this is every condition in every position. And that's a little rhyme I made up to help me remember this. Every condition in every position. So every condition, chunks, Purina, Kroger, occurs on the first day. I've got chunks somewhere on the first day. chunks somewhere on the second day, chunks somewhere on the third day. I've got Purina somewhere on the first day, somewhere on the second day, somewhere on the third day. Kroger somewhere on the first day, somewhere on the second day, somewhere on the third day. So this is the minimum viable amount of counterbalancing. Because at least in this layout, I have some data for chunks before Purina, Purina before chunks, Kroger before chunks, chunks before Kroger, and so forth. So I've got all the different combinations. This is as little counterbalancing as I can do and still feel like I've managed to deal with sequence effects. Now, it's not optimal. We'd like more repetitions if we could get it. But in some circumstances, this is the best you can do. It's all you need to do to see if it will actually work, right? If your procedure and other things are actually functional, you can do this. And it gives you some counterbalancing. It gives you multiple points of data for each food type. You can still take an average across all the dogs to see how much they eat of the different foods. And if it looks like there might be something to go with, then you can start gathering more data from more subjects. So this is incomplete, an incomplete design with partial counterbalancing. Now, this layout that will give you that maximum counterbalancing for minimum effort, that every condition in every position, is called a Latin square. And there are lots of different formulas for creating a Latin square. There's lots of different ways you can do it. I'm going to teach you the super easiest way, which is called random order with rotation. Remember this, Javier? Random order with rotation is great. All you have to do is start off with some random order. Just pick any one of the blocks. Pick one. Give me a block.
ACB.
ACB. All right. So I'm going to pick ACB. Okay. That's my first random order. Now, all I'm going to do is rotate it. So I'm going to take what's at the beginning and move it to the end. Okay. Now I'm going to take what came after and just move it over. Now I'm going to do it again. C is at the beginning now. Put it at the end. Take what's left. Move it over. And if you do that, and you do it so that you have the same number of rows and columns, you will have a Latin square. Super easy to make one, and you'll see you've got every condition in every position. Doesn't matter which one you pick, A, B, or C. And it works for 4, 5, 6, 7 conditions, doesn't matter. As long as you have the same number of rows as conditions, you can rotate through, and it will give you that every condition in every position counterbalancing. And you will have a reasonable set of data to do analysis on. Of course, more data is typically better, but if you can't get more data, this is a good place to start. What you don't want to do is take some subjects and run on day one, have them go in and do one do A, one do C, one do B. The next day have somebody come in and have one person do, one dog do C, one dog do B, one dog do A, and then stop. Oh look, they did it. No, don't do that. Okay, every dog needs to experience every condition, and every dog needs to experience every condition in a different order from the other dogs in the study. So they all have to experience all of them, and you want them to do it in a different order to get as much counterbalancing as possible. And if you do it this way, it's a systematic choice that will give you the best pattern of results you can get, pretty much. And it doesn't matter which order you start with. All of them are comparably good. Does anybody have any questions about it? Make sense? Good? Okay. So what do I expect you to be able to do with this? I expect you to be able to recognize, so if I present you with a description of a study, you should be able to tell me whether it is between subjects or within subjects. You should be able to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable. You should be able to tell me if the independent variable is a manipulated variable or subject variable. If I give you the conditions and I ask you to do block randomization, you should be able to come up with block randomized, either random assignment if it's a between subjects design, or random orders for counterbalancing if it's a within subjects design. So you need to know that formula, 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, or 3 times 2 times 1, or however many. You need to know how to do that formula depending on how many levels are in the independent variable. And know how to apply it, what the randomization is used for between subjects and within subjects designs. So if I ask you to make a Latin square, you should be able to do that. If I ask you to do some matching, where you create matched groups and then do random assignment, you should be able to do that. Does anybody have any questions? Now, we're going to do problem set, where you get to practice doing these things on your own. Right now, I'm still in that, let me fill your brain up a little bit more with some details. And then we will do a problem set that we will work on. You will work on it at home. We'll talk about it in class and go through the whole thing so that you can practice applying this knowledge in the way that I will expect you to on a test when we do application problems. Okay. I won't send you into the test asking you to do application problems that look nothing like anything you've seen. Tests will have fill in the blank, they will have multiple choice, they may have matching. If we're doing statistics, they may have calculations. But if I ask you to do something like this, I will let you practice it first. I'm not just going to say, here, figure out how to do this randomly. All right, so if you guys are good with that, what I'd like to do now is move on to the next bit, which is talking about threats to internal validity, and that's the new handout for today. Now, we've already talked about the top 3 on this list. But remember that internal validity is the one kind of validity that's exclusive to experimental designs. So we have to spend a little bit of extra time talking about it to make sure that you're thinking, we're talking about these different kinds of designs, you're thinking about all the different ways that internal validity could be influenced. Because in order to make a causal claim, which is the whole point of doing an experiment, in order to make a causal claim, you have to have good internal validity. To the extent that internal validity fails or is weak, your causal claim fails or is weak. Okay, so internal validity, good internal validity, is critical to a causal claim because that's the thing. This internal validity is about elimination of alternate explanations for the result. And if you're going to make a claim that A causes B, you need to be confident that C and D and E and F and G and H and I and J and K did not get in the process and help A do its job. So I made this handout for you that expands on some things that were on the next PowerPoint slide, where I just listed a few few threats to internal validity. Your book has a much more detailed explanation, so I generated a more detailed explanation and added more examples that are different from the ones in your book to give you more practice thinking about these different kinds of threats. So we've already talked about these 3. We talked about basic design, okay? Basic design threats. So if you're designing a study and you don't control for certain extraneous variables, right? If you say I'm doing my dog food study and I don't take into consideration when the dogs in my study normally eat. That's just dumb, right? That's just a basic design thing. If you're feeding dogs food and measuring how much food they eat, then you should be thinking about when they normally eat. Okay? Because that's when they're going to be more comfortable eating. Okay? So you just want to be thoughtful. I mean, this is that common sense, be reasonable kind of decision making that when you're designing a study. Be practical. If you want dogs to eat a lot of food so you've got data to work with, then feed them when they're hungry. Right? It also means things like don't have the dogs come in and eat all the foods in one day. Because they're going to eat more at the beginning than they do at the end. It doesn't make any sense. So just make reasonable basic design choices so as not to threaten the internal validity of your study. And that's true whether you're doing an between subjects design or within subjects design. Just use common sense. Think about what could be a problem. I mean, we know, for example, that people eat more when it's cold than when it's hot. That's why restaurants air condition the crap out of the dining room. Because they want you to be cold because it makes you order more food. Did you know that? Wear a sweater. If you are on a diet, wear a sweater to a restaurant. Okay? Because if you're cold, and and I guess if you're taking somebody out to eat and you're feeling cheap, bring a sweater for them. Or sit really close and snuggle. Tell them you're being romantic and you're just like trying to keep the bill down. Quit getting more apps. We're good. We're warm. Quit doing that. Okay? Distract them. Okay, so, this is ridiculous. Anyway, so so if you want the dogs to eat a lot, make the room cooler, right? If you make the room hot or if the air conditioning's broken in the room, find a different room. Because if the dogs are hot, you know what they're going to want to do? Drink water and lay on the ground. And the water's going to fill them up and they're just going to feel lazy. Dogs lay on the porch on a hot day. You've seen a dog lay on they're not like, food. They're like, right? They're just dying. So if the room's too hot, they're not going to eat. So you have to make sure that the room is a comfortable temperature for the dogs, right? This is just common sense kind of stuff. So think about the things you know that could influence the behavior and try to manage those effectively from the beginning. Then we have effects that tend to impact between subjects' designs and within subjects' designs differentially. So selection effects are effects that tend to impact between subjects' designs because they're about the groups in the study being different from each other. If for some reason the subjects in one of your conditions are markedly different or different in some meaningful way relevant to your study from the subjects in other conditions, you've got a problem. Because remember, the number one concern of a between subjects design is having groups of subjects that are similar enough to compare statistically in a meaningful way. If they're already too different to begin with, you're going to have a problem. So the example I gave you up here, say you're doing a study where you're looking at, you're comparing people from different racial and ethnic groups on some task. It turns out that all the men in your study, or all the Latinos in your study are male, and all the African Americans in your study are female. Well, you've got a problem. Because while there may be fundamental differences between Latinos and African Americans in some dimension because of cultural differences, we know for sure there are differences between men and women. Right? Yes, absolutely. No doubt whatsoever. So if you're interested in racial and ethnic differences in attitudes, say, about mental health care, that's one thing. But if it's confounded with something like sex, well, men and women have different feelings about and thoughts about health care too. And you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Whether it's the people's sex or it's their racial and ethnic background that's influencing their choice. And it might be a combination, but you can't tell because they're confounded. You've got some kind of weird selection effect. It can also happen when you have people volunteer for a study. In your textbook, they talk about a study where they were looking at different treatments for autism, helping children cope with the challenges of autism. And one choice was a very intensive treatment that required the parents to come in and work with the therapist for 20, 25, 30 hours a week with the child. Very intensive, time-consuming therapy. And the other was a much less intensive, less time-consuming therapy. And when people who volunteered for the study read about the options, because you have to tell them about what the different options are, because you would like to think you're going to randomly assign them to a condition, there were certain families that said, no, we want this option. We want the intensive option. We're ready for that. We got it. Now, you have to imagine that the people who have the time and the resources and the energy to spend 20 or 30 hours in a lab over several weeks working with their child, that could be a different subset of the population than people who say, I need something that I can do at home in the evening with my child after I get off of work. You've got to have at least one parent who's not working, and you've got to have money to be able to afford to have one parent not work or something like that, right? These could be fundamentally different groups. That's also a selection effect. So if you let people choose what condition they're in, that could introduce a selection effect. That's why random assignment is important, because you need people who are enthusiastic and invested in both of the conditions, not just one. And you need people from all different backgrounds in both of the conditions, not just one. So randomization is your friend here, yeah.
For the study with the two different treatment options that you just talked about, would it could you just tell them only about the one that you're randomly selecting them to be in, or do you have to tell them about both options?
Well, remember that when you're getting informed consent,
Right.
If you're asking people to make a big commitment, because
Right.
it's possible they could be randomly assigned to a condition that requires them to invest 25 or 30 hours a week,
Right.
they need to know that,
Right.
right? Because you can't just say, oh, can you come be in my study? Okay, now you have to be here every day for 8 hours a day for
Right.
the next, yeah. Because what's going to happen? They're out of there, right?
Right.
If they're not willing to do it.
But you can't tell them like about just the specific one that you want to randomly assign them to. Like, isn't there a level of deception?
Well, oh boy,
Isn't
now
there
we're talking about deception. This is exciting. Well, you could. Okay, and then we run into other problems, which is what happens, because here you might be talking about a community where people know each other, where families recommended other families to participate in the study.
True.
And then they find out that somebody else is having a different experience than they're having. And they're like, wait a second, why is my child being robbed of this opportunity for this aggressive new treatment?
True, but I mean, if you're in a study, you have to know there's. I mean, I would think that you would know that there's 2 different options at least. You know, if it's a study, they have to
Yeah,
compare
but it
to
could just be a
something.
control condition where they're not doing anything different, you know? So
Sure.
it depends on how much you want to disclose. So you're absolutely right that there are research-related strategies you could use to minimize the likelihood that you would have problems.
Right.
Certainly there are things you can do. It depends on how open you want to be at the beginning. But you also have to imagine that if you can get people in the different conditions that are selecting the treatment they think works best for their family, you might have the most effective. I mean, it could be that not one treatment is good for everybody. Right? It's possible that different treatments could be effective for different families or different children. I mean, there are lots of people, for example, who have depression. And for some people, Prozac works great. And for some people, they need Lexapro. And for some people, they need something else. For some people, the drugs don't help at all. But talk therapy works great. And for some people, a combination of drugs and talk therapy is the most effective thing. And some people take, use hormone cream. And some people do, I mean, there's lots of different ways to treat depression.
Right.
So you make a choice, right? Is there going to be, do you want to have people who are invested in the study and in the condition they're assigned to who are going to stick with it through the whole thing? And what you don't want someone who's like, I want to be in the study, and then they get randomly assigned to the hard group, and then they're like, this is too hard, I quit. Because then you run into another threat of internal validity, which is called attrition, where people drop out of the study and then you
Right.
lose their data completely.
But then isn't there also the like for example in magazines when they have statistics, it's usually people who volunteered their answers, so like they're skewed statistics.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't it be the same for people who volunteered for certain things because they might be more enthusiastic, therefore
Absolutely.
they're...
That's why so that's where you've got the issue of random sampling versus convenient sampling.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So all we're doing in research is juggling all these things, trying to cost-benefit analysis our way to a good answer. And when you're talking about people and their feelings and their families and their kids and their mental health and their research, this is why we will all have jobs. Because this is complicated stuff. That's why we have 2 classes about this. Because this is not an easy thing to do, to keep all these balls in the air and make all the choices that balance out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's tricky. You are right on. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it almost seems like you want to use some form of deception actively because of the biases that they might feel by choosing which one. They might think
I need to go with this aggressive
Yeah.
treatment, and then it might be a total wrong match for them.
Right.
Right. And maybe the more spread out gentle treatment would be the better choice for their family, but they don't know. They think, or they're like, I have to be super mom. I need to go for the most aggressive treatment, whatever. Or maybe you've got the people who are like, I totally don't like the fact that my child is autistic and that they're sick and I want to fix them. Versus the families who are like, you know what, my child is the way my child is. And I love my child how my child is, and I'd be happy to do this to help them learn some coping strategies. My child doesn't need to be fixed. I need to learn better how to be the parent my child needs. Those are 2 totally different groups of people. And so that's what selection effects can just emerge, and you can try, but I mean, who do you pick? Who do you put where?
Yeah.
Do you go for randomization, where you might get people in a situation that doesn't fit them at all, but maybe you find out that there's a great solution they never thought about? Or do you go with what they think they should do? I mean, it's tough. It's not transparent. It's not like you should always do this. That's the thing about research. It's not that you should always do X. There's so many things in the air at the same time that you have to kind of go with go with the flow and get a sense of the community you're working with and what the different options are. But you have to be aware. Is there anything about the study that could be leading to selection effects? Or am I getting imbalanced groups when I don't mean to? When I'm trying to get balanced groups? Yeah?
Do they sometimes do interviews with them, so like to get a feel for what their personality is?
Sure, you might. But you also have to watch out then when you start interviewing and things like that, because then you're moving away from randomly assigning people, and random assignment helps distribute other individual differences you don't even know about. So it's like, what do we do? I don't know. I can only give you information, and you have to think about how to apply this in different situations. And you're like, no, we want to know the answer to memorize. There isn't one. That's the hard news, is that there's no answer to memorize. It's just there are these different ideas, and we have to work with them. So then we've got order, right? And order is the effect, threat to internal validity, that most directly affects within subjects designs, right? We talked a lot about that today, so I'm not going to drag on and on about that. But the example they talk about in your textbook is they talk about a study where students had to solve puzzles. They got a little booklet of puzzles, and the only difference in the booklets was that for one group of students, their name or their ID number was written in red ink on the cover, and another group of students it was written in black ink, and another group of students it was written in green ink. And they found, oddly enough, I think this is kind of surprising, that at least in this culture, people are so conditioned to respond negatively to red ink because it's the ink of criticism, right? That anybody who got the red ink pamphlet did worse. And it wasn't even the problems. It was just their ID number on the cover page. Just having their ID number in red ink on the cover led to significantly poorer performance. We see red ink and we go, and I will just apologize in advance because sometimes my purple pen runs out of ink and I have to go back to red. It's not personal, and I'm not trying to limit your performance.
We have to recondition ourselves.
You have to recondition
the red ink.
That's right. It's like, I want you to feel the red ink as love, as caring, like, low red heart of love. It's me giving you feedback about how to improve, right? But I try to use purple or blue or something else because people do look at red and they go,
Yeah.
But the idea was that if they were to give everybody the red first, it could actually cause a problem. Because if they have bad performance in the beginning, that could carry over. So in order to address those order effects, you have to mix up the order. And it turned out when they did counterbalancing, appropriate counterbalancing, that it didn't matter what order people got the red in. Whenever they got the red, they did worse than on any other condition. Right? And that's what you want to see. So those are order effects. Now we're going to move into other effects that I want you to be thinking about, I want you to be looking for, and you're not going to find every one of these in every study, but what I want you to do, if I'm asking you to think about the internal validity of an experiment, I want you to ask yourself, okay, could this threat be relevant? Could this threat be relevant? Could this threat be relevant? They're not all going to be relevant, but some of them could. So if you're doing a study, a within subject study, or even a between subject study, where you're looking at people going through developmental growth, developmental stages. That could be kids going through stages, or even older adults going through stages. Okay, we develop all through our lives, right? But if you're looking at a long-term study that's having people go through some period of developmental growth, you have to wonder if changes you observe from the beginning to the end of the study could be the result not of your treatment, whatever it is you had them do, but something called maturation. Okay? This is a natural change. So if I'm studying children, and say I'm trying to teach them a new, I'm trying to help children improve their fine motor skills, because they need fine motor skills to be able to write with a pencil or to use a keyboard. And I want them to help them be literate faster, so I'm helping them with fine motor skills. Now, if I play these games with the children over a period of several weeks, several months, trying to improve their fine motor skills, and I observe an improvement in their fine motor skills from at the end of the study relative to the beginning of the study, well, it might very well be the games that I've been playing more effective. But it's also true that children's fine motor skills change anyway. They get better just from functioning in their world, having to work on buttoning buttons and doing their pants and tying their shoes and doing other things, holding a fork at home, other things or chopsticks if that's what they use at home, right? So their fine motor skills improve naturally over time. So I can't do this with a single group and do kind of a pre-test, post-test assessment. I need a control group. I need to have a group that doesn't play the games and see how their fine motor skills change over time so that I can compare them to the group that played the games. If I just do this as a pre-test, post-test, where I do it just totally within subjects before and after, it won't work. Because I can't tell if it's maturation or my games. So throw in a control group that doesn't play the games, test them on the same fine motor skill stuff at the beginning as your experimental group, then play games with the one group, then test them at the end. Look and see if there's a difference there. Not before or after, because you would naturally expect there to be differences there, but only at the ends between the control group and the experimental group. Another phenomenon that can affect an experimental study is effective history. History, when you have an effective history on a study, it's some big external event that changes the playing field, basically, for all or most of the people in the study. So if I were studying the factors that influence people's spending habits, say I was doing this in New Orleans a few years ago, before Katrina hit, and then Katrina hits, right? The factors that were influencing people's spending habits in New Orleans before Katrina and after Katrina were fundamentally different. Right? So I have to think of them as two totally different situations. I can't go on, continue thinking about, well, this is all still New Orleans. It's not. New Orleans pre-Katrina and post-Katrina are two fundamentally different things. It's like the U.S. pre-9/11 and post-9/11. Those are fundamentally different situations. You can't compare. You can't treat as the same people's attitudes about air safety pre-9/11 and post-9/11. Because there was a historical event that fundamentally changed the situation. And these are extreme cases, but it could be something smaller. I mean, say you're doing research on your campus about sexual assault. There's a lot of talk right now about sexual assault on university campuses and how campuses are dealing with it. And maybe you're doing research about that, people's attitudes about that. Well, if it were to happen that in the middle of your study there was some big event that resulted in the sexual assault of multiple people and there was a big press issue and everyone was talking about it and maybe famous students on campus were involved in what happened and it was some big deal. Well, that's a historical event. That's now going to change how people think about the topic you're asking questions about. And you can't treat it like it's the same anymore. These are pre-event and post-event are two different things. And you can't attribute any change in people's attitudes to whatever you're doing because that historical event has basically clouded the issue. So that's a historical impact. Do I have enough time for one more? One more. Okay. So I'm going to do regression to the mean. I love regression to the mean. Because regression to the mean is about people moving from extreme states to more normal states. We talk a lot in psychology about people moving from normal states to extreme states, like being kind of a normal happy person to being really depressed, or being a normal happy person to being really manic. But the truth is that everybody goes through extreme states. Right? The example I like to use, I'd like you to think back to the first time you were really in love. You remember that? How the sun rose and set on that person? How just the sound of their name made your heart go boom, 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 right? You get all warm and fuzzy, and you were just, everything was so totally fabulous, just thinking, goosebumps just thinking about them being anywhere near you. You were in love. Okay? And even if this love was reciprocated, you know that kind of love, what happens? That's an extreme state. Let me tell you about people. We don't stay in extreme states for long. You can be goofy, stupid over somebody, give it a year. Hey, you may still love them, But you're not all, oh, you're just not, because now you know that they leave their underwear on the floor, and now you know that they don't take out the trash when they're supposed to, and now you know whatever. You return to a more normal functional state, because if we were all walking around crazy in love all the time, we would not get anything done, because you know how dumb you get, right? You can't think, you can't function, all you can do is think about that person, send them little texts. Think about you. You're like, focus on your classwork, right? I mean, you gotta graduate, right? So you get into these extreme states, but eventually you come to some normal state. And so, but people get picked to be in research studies because they're in an extreme state and need help, right? So maybe you have people who are really depressed, or people who are really fat, or people who are really thin, and they need help because they're sick. But the truth is that in most cases, even people who are extremely depressed and deal with major depression in their lives, they have depressive episodes. And even if you didn't do anything, over the course of time, they would become less depressed. They will get better, at least a little bit, on their own. So because people naturally return to a more balanced state, you always have to keep in mind that change over time from an extreme state to a more normal state may not reflect a treatment, but it's a simple regression back to a normal state, because we just don't stay extreme. Even if we love the extreme state we're in, we don't stay there. We can't, because we lose functioning when we get too extreme. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we've hit time today. I don't want to go over.